This is the meeting of the Expenditure and Revenue Committee for June the 9th, 2025. Let's start off with miscellaneous items, approving the meeting minutes for May 1 and May 14. But before we approve those, I'd like to suggest that we send them back because they seem to have been written by AI. And for example, on May 14, there is some reference to a Dr. King.
No, that was my fault. I know a Karen King, and I kept thinking Karen King when I was typing, but I fixed those.
Okay.
So they are now Dr. Karen Schmuckler, not Dr. Karen King.
Or you could have changed your name to accommodate the minutes.
It wasn't AI.
No, it wasn't. I can type those. I can type those.
Okay. With that correction, are there any other corrections or edits? People have? I can't think if there's anything else. But anyway, I can let you know if I find anything else. I think there are a couple of little nits. Okay, with that, all in favor of approving the minutes do you mind approving both minutes or do you want to go separately? Was everyone here for those meetings?
I wasn't there on the 14th, so I was going to abstain for that particular vote.
We'll do them separately. All in favor of approving the minutes for May 1st, 2025, please indicate by saying aye. Dick Benka.
Oh.
Aye. Okay. Dick's in the room, not on TV, right? Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Aye.
Jeff Rudolph.
Aye.
Sergio Modigliani.
Aye.
Dana Galbert.
Aye.
Sadis Kazmi.
Aye.
Sarah Mokhtar.
Not here today.
Oh, okay. John Dogger. Yeah. Jan Van Scoyer's not here. He's an alternate anyway. Jesse Hafter. Gosh, you're an alternate also.
But Sarah's not here, so he can.
Oh, okay, so it's either you or yes, you are the yeah. And let's see, do we have a advisory committee person?
That was John Dye. He voted.
Oh, okay.
I don't need to invite you.
Okay, good. Okay, and chair votes aye. So minutes for May 1st are approved. May 14, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Dick Benka.
Abstain. I had to leave.
Okay, Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Aye.
Jeff Rudolph.
Abstain. I also missed that meeting.
Okay, Sergio Modigliani.
Aye.
Dana Galbert.
Aye.
Sadis Kazmi.
Abstain.
Sarah here. John Dogger.
Aye.
And Jesse Hafter.
Aye.
Okay, and what's aye. So the minutes for May 14, 2025 as amended, of course, have been approved. So next item is follow up on the Public Schools of Brookline expenditures data and trends overview from May 14, including preliminary discussion around revenue enhancement and expenditure reduction opportunities. So who has that job? That you, Stu?
I was told we were gonna continue the conversation from the last meeting, and there was nothing more for me to prepare, so
Okay.
Karen and I are here to, answer whatever.
Just following the agenda that's posted.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so I thought we had moved through to the end of the first PowerPoint, then I had also shared kind of how we approached coming up with the comps for the schools. It's kind of straightforward. Happy to answer any questions around that. So, and in school time, our last meeting was about a year ago. So it's hard to recollect if there was anything that was unanswered at that moment. So I would have to rely on your individual memory to get us kind of started here.
Janet.
I would be interested in pursuing, you said other places that you worked were very different from Brookline, and if you could delve into that a little bit more. You seem to think the other places work better, if that's the right word. So just to give me a sense, because I don't really know a lot about schools. My daughter has school-age kids of her own, and they're not around here, so.
Sure, so, I think maybe I'd best describe it as inefficient
Here,
here.
and what was more efficient other places?
Timeliness of, processing and accessing information.
And that's just within the schools, not town systems.
I can't speak to the town experience, only the school experience.
So just your school experience, and is there anything particular that made it happen? Is it here a function of the continual turnover, which slows down any system?
I think some of it is the way the model is designed here that makes it very challenging on the school side. And so what do I mean? Give you an example, right? So I'll give you an example because I live it every day.
Okay.
Trying to get some information and reports so that I can report out to the school committee on the status of our finances. And when my staff is trying to get that information, sometimes some of our data has been posted for a while, actions that are sent down to the accounting office haven't been processed yet. So we're operating in kind of like this real-time environment, but there's a lag between being able to get that to be reflected in the documents that we're looking at so that we can make informed decision that incorporates all of what we know is happening.
And that's all internal school systems. It's not town account.
No, that happens on the town side. So we send information over.
Okay, because that's what I'm not clear on.
Yeah.
Is how much is school owned? I see a lot of duplication in what I would call function, like payroll, what have you, but I don't know how much of it happens on the town side versus.
It depends on the operation. So I would say in some areas, great improvements have been made over the last 2 years. I think there's still room for growth, but I would say in the area of payroll in particular, on the school side, the error rate is not at all what it used to be. There's still some tension, I would say, in terms of timing of when things get processed. And I think on the school side, there's a lot of employees and there's a lot, just as the town has many CPAs, so do we. So I would say that area has improved. I think the turnover on the town side in the comptroller's office and in the treasurer's office has had an impact on us. And, and it hasn't had an impact on us. And everybody else, and so it's not a fault, it's a situation, and we're all, have tried to make the best of it.
So going back to your other experiences, were those more self-contained within the schools, or is it just our systems aren't?
I think there's a variety of different ways that you can set up the systems, and there's a lot of different strategies we could use to make it to allow us to function at a higher level on the school side. But it would take would take time and effort and commitment to doing that. One of the things that I had mentioned in my first year was since everything revolves around Munis here, and Munis is set up really as the town's instance, and it was really set up for the benefit of the town. It's not really, it doesn't really serve the school side that well. And so what we've been trying to do is to modify like charts of accounts and things like that. But it seems to be challenging. It's challenging when the comptrollers, you lose your comptroller, and then you gotta hire somebody and all of that. So I think there's a lot of those kinds of challenges. So one of the things I thought, at least on the payroll side, is, well, a couple of things. One, should we have 2 instances of Munis? One that the schools could set up for school purposes, and then it could feed through a CV file, which I've done this before, through a CV file, send that over to the town to post, so that it's posting in the town, but we're able to set it up for our purposes. It would be so much more efficient to do it that way, because then we're not trying to always do workarounds in order to force things. It
Right.
could, you know, and so every time you do workarounds, it creates inefficiency. And you know, I've heard some conversation about, well, why don't we do budgeting through like what is it? Yeah,
Whatever, yeah.
yeah, which isn't really, I mean, it might serve one purpose, but it doesn't serve the school's purpose, right? Because on the school side, our budget is really the financial representation of our educational plan. And so having little descriptions that just are used year in and year out, really it does a disservice to the work that we're doing in many ways. If the accounts were set up that in a way that would really serve the schools, then maybe it would have more meaning.
Mhm.
But that's just not the way that it is right now. And so it's oftentimes on our side, we're always having to do workarounds to get it to force the tool to give us enough information, even on the financial reporting. I just lost my train of thought, but even on the financial reporting piece, for me to get a report out of Munis that's meaningful, it feels impossible. So that means that we take reports from Munis, and I think this was kind of one of the things they talk about. Why do we have all these spreadsheets and everything? Because the data doesn't come to us in a form that's meaningful. And so we have to manipulate the data in order to get it to be meaningful. And so that creates challenges then.
Yeah.
Also, the data that's in Munis is not clean. And so you can't use Munis on the school side to say, let's look at, and there's a whole variety of reasons why that is, but it isn't clean. And so what I've tried to do in the last 2 years is on 85% of our budget, as you know, is salary. And so the most important thing that you can do is create like a staffing plan, you know, that the school principals can translate from their education, what's happening in the building, and that can then be translated into the budget and payroll. It's an essential internal control in all schools. You can't just get that out of Munis. But what you do is you have that and you align it to like your CBA language and all the pay components in that. If I can get that clean, then we can go back into Munis and then we have a benchmark, right? Right now, until you have something that is true, you can't clean up what's in Munis until you know what you're cleaning it to. You got to reconcile, right?
Yeah.
You have this, you compare it to that, you figure out what is the difference between what should be and what is, and then you make those changes. And after you make those corrections, then you print and make sure that they both align. And so that's kind of been the work that I've really been engaged in for the last year and a half, to try to get that baseline so we can clean up Munis. And one of the things we've learned, and put position controls in place and all of that, we haven't made as much progress in getting Munis to align with the plan, with the true up, you know, and that's a little disappointing. But it's also it's hard because it's so messy, and you have to keep. It's like you have to keep functioning while you're trying to change.
You know, I've been in similar situations.
Yeah, you know, and so you make so much progress, and then you're kind of at a place where you can't make any more until you get to another pause spot to make the next iteration. So in the meantime, it's very inefficient for
Okay,
all those
but-
reasons.
But
So, I've heard this comment for, literally 10 years. And I guess I have a couple of questions. Number one is, what is everyone else in the state doing? because we don't hear about these sorts of issues elsewhere. And I guess the second is in the outside report that just came in, they made reference to a UNIS module that could be potentially used to, I guess, simplify the way that schools in the town communicate. Or the third is, you know, human resources. Do we have enough people doing the work? And I guess I'm just a little confused.
Thanks, please, since, you know, we've been talking about this for 10 years. I think part of the issue is that the chart of accounts on the school side has never conformed to what the new DESI standard is, and correct me if I'm misstating any of these. So the people that have been in Susan's role have been trying to get the chart of accounts course corrected, and that I think has changed over time in terms of, in addition to kind of changing the accounts, you're also talking about everyone's roles and permissions and what people can see. And so those things get modified as the requests come in. But it's changed over the years. So I think that the, you know, the CLA, one of the people working on the CLA report was the former comptroller in Lowell. And Lowell is a super user for Munis. I think they use almost all of the modules that Munis offers. And so they're very familiar with how it works. So one of the modules that they're recommending is the budget module. And that way all your projections are done in Munis, and your budget building is also in Munis as well. I mean, part of what we went to OpenGov for was to kind of provide better clarity around the account structure and kind of visually making the budget book look better as well. But when Mary Ellen was here, she wanted to use OpenGov to provide the crosswalk that was needed between Munis and what the actual chart of accounts needed. And she was almost there, and then she left. So, and then we had OpenGov not being utilized on the school side for a couple of years, and then we discontinued that. So, you know, I think that's part of, you know, the challenge is that, you know, you get someone in who's trying to clean up things, and they're not here long enough to kind of see it to completion.
I think that's it. Munis isn't designed for the school instance. It's really designed for town government. And I can tell you that in going to school events, you know, that it's not a user-friendly tool for schools. Doesn't mean you can't force it, right? There's ways that you can make it give you most of what you'd want, but it still is not, it wasn't originally designed for the school. So over time, Munis has made like some adjustments in order to be a little bit more friendly to schools, but it really does start with the original setup. When the original setup is done, you know, it needs to comply with, you know, two sets of kind of charts of accounts. One is the UNIS, which is the Uniform Massachusetts Accounting Code Structure, and then there's DESI. And in order for schools and towns to be able to get the kind of reporting that you need in order to and comply with these structures, so that if Brookline's submitting reports, that you can pretty much assume that the reports you're comparing to in Newton, the same things are being recorded in the same types of lines and structures. So here it wasn't set up originally to conform with those two charts of accounts. Munis will accommodate a full complement of segments to do that, and many school districts have done that. But that's why my thought was, well, maybe what we do, because we're very deep in, the town's very deep in using Munis in a way that seems to support their work. But that's why I thought, well, maybe we get a second instance of Munis and or some other tool like that. We could set that one up properly, and we could send over, and I've done this, I've set them up that way so that they can post to the chart of accounts on the town side at the higher level, but I can get all the reports and all of that functionality that I need. So that was one thought I had. That way you could kind of keep going instead of trying to keep modifying something while you're running, that maybe you can just like set it up correctly on this for the school instance, and then just reconnect with the town. That was just a thought I had. I'm not saying it's a great one, but I don't know what else to really do to get you there quicker.
It's not get me there. So
I-
to get everyone. I'm kind of curious as to whether or not we've heard these problems from other municipalities and whether or not we have. What's the solution? Okay, because this is something that it strikes me that really we should just find some agreed approach and just go and do it, because to have the same conversations for 10 years, it's really not, it's not good for any of us.
If I could just have a little more context on on the environment for, for accounting systems for municipalities, right? I don't know what else may be available for just school districts, but if we're, like a regional school district, for example, Susan had been passed in Massachusetts, but for town accounting and by extension, school systems that are just part of one town and not a multi municipality district. Munis is not without its problems, but it is the system that that is used certainly by the majority of municipalities, and one that more municipalities are going towards. There really is only one other serious competitor, which has not been supported, but been purchased several times, and it's simpler than Munis, and in some ways I actually prefer it. However, the company that has purchased it, in a couple of iterations, it's clear that they're not going to be supporting this long term. That's just obvious. So what that means is that Munis is our option, and we, there's certainly things I don't like about it. I think there's probably everyone who in this room
There's no
who works
perfect
on
system. Yeah.
it doesn't like it, but I know certainly from the finance department, we're certainly committed to doing anything we can to help to make it work for the schools.
So I had my hand raised. I just wanted to chime in here. I think it's helpful to know that this is a tool that's used broadly across different municipalities. So other people make it work, right? Every town almost has a school system, right? Or they have a regional school system. If the issue is with how it was set up originally, I mean, typically you can go back and modify those settings, right? Creating a separate instance usually creates other problems around syncing data and sort of, other things in addition to sort of incremental cost, right? Inevitably. So I assume that this is an issue that can be addressed by doing some remediation around how it's set up. And then I think that if we think that that's the case, then the question is, can you budget for that from a funding perspective? But, the fact that this has been going on for 10 years and seems like this is a significant hindrance is a challenge. Syncing data or managing data in spreadsheets just is error prone, right? Inevitably, that's just the way that works. And so that feels like an unsustainable solution as well. So just wanted to put that on the table. I mean, I assume that this is something that you can go back and address, and that's not uncomplicated. I want to acknowledge that, because then you have to potentially recast numbers. But that seems like the rational fix for it, especially if other communities are using this product more broadly, then they've made it work.
I think any of us would disagree you could make it work. It's how do we get it to work now that it wasn't set up originally?
Right. I'm suggesting that you go back and you set it up right, which requires some investment, certainly, I would imagine, but I'm not sure that, that's something we should discuss.
Dick.
Yeah, thank you. I'd actually like to turn to one of the subjects in our charge, which is the subject of benchmarking. There was a slide or a PowerPoint with comparables, and you looked at tax rates, SAT scores, and AP scores. And I'm wondering if we can drill down further than that, and to what extent you have drilled down further than that and looked at other school districts in terms of their programs, their costs, their revenue sources. For example, class size in other school districts, course offerings at the high school, class sizes at the high school, salaries, maybe in the context of collective bargaining, benefits in other school districts, charges for programs that are not mandatory, early education, our BEAT program, to the extent it's not mandatory. What sort of information have you aggregated? What sort of information is available on what other school districts, the so-called comparables beyond tax rates, SATs, and AP scores?
So it's how do we use those? So like, I'll give you an example. So when we're setting.
No, I mean, the first question is, what information is there that you have about other school districts?
So when we are evaluating, let's say tuitions for BEAT, early childhood programs, we contact these communities to find out what they're charging. Sometimes if we're looking at a model change, we'll investigate, how these other communities how their models work. And so we gather data based on the needs that we have at the time. So
is that information available?
We present it at typically finance subcommittee meetings. And so
I'm just wondering what this committee could access. Another issue that obviously has come up is the issue of out of district and settlements. What is the experience of other districts with respect to that?
I'll pop down to the other end of the table.
No, I mean, there's a whole laundry list of cost generators and potential revenue generators, and we're supposed to be benchmarking. And my question is, what data is out there and what data can we have?
Can I ask a question? If you presented this to the school committee subcommittee on finance, that's available to us.
Yeah, it's on the website.
On the website, so.
Okay, I mean,
It would be helpful if we had questions, wanted particular things, that we were able to get some sort of index as to when they were presented, because otherwise you can go through a lot of different agendas. And I think the other thing we need to be aware of is that they're almost like project things, there's an inquiry, and so the data gets presented, it may get stale fairly quickly. I'm not sure there's something that's dynamic, which would be ideal.
obviously that's possible. Yeah.
And that's true what Cliff is saying, because even right now, some of the best comparison data, if you can get it off of the DESIC website, but it lags 2 years. They haven't even posted 24 data yet, and we're here at the end of 25. And so even when I look and I compare to other school districts, so let's say I'm looking per pupil, because I do look at that. How do we compare on a per pupil basis? And I do have that information, but it's from 23. And now I'm going into 26. And so to make, meaning out of that when I'm looking at next year and it's 2 years lag information, it can be frustrating. Now, DESI hasn't always been that slow, but it happens to be that way right now. So I look at enrollment. I mean, there's things I look at when I take a peek to see how we're, and I have some information certainly that I can share, but it's like Cliff said, it's usually at a project. I'm looking for something, and so then I'm getting comp information. There isn't like a huge database of information that has all of those kind of metrics in them. So you wind up having to shag the information from the various, school districts. And sometimes they have the time to give it to you and dig things out, and sometimes they don't. So
Do you have a sort of Or could you easily create a list of comparable subsets of information that you have from other comparable communities or of the subsets? I mean, do you look at class sizes, for example?
That you would have to get by calling the various schools. You have a
Have you
teacher
done,
to student
have you
ratio.
done that? Is my question. I mean, is that information available or do we have to do that?
Well, class sizes, I mean, there are some benchmarks that I would say in the field, we that are common, right? There's also caseload information out there of, and we do look at those, but we don't look at all of it all of the time.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the capacity to do that. But there is information out there that you can bring up if you go to the DESE website. So again, depending on what you're looking at, you have to know a little bit about how to navigate that, but there are some ways that you can do that.
It would be really interesting to understand the class size policies of the individual school districts. And then if there was a way to take a look at actual versus policy, I think that would be pretty informative. Because ultimately that's what people are looking at here. We've got policies, but
Yeah.
then they look at what the actuals are and they don't understand why.
Yeah, I guess my
Sergio
question
has
is
a question.
if we're supposed to be looking at savings or possible savings, or is an override necessary? Are there revenue opportunities? Are there saving opportunities, which is within our charge? How do we go about doing that with respect to the schools?
So I think it would help.
Wait, Janet, let's Sergio.
Well, I think I just wanted to clarify that I think what Dick Benka was trying to ask Dr. Gibbons is whether you feel you have access to an archive of data. So for example, on the question of the BEAT tuition, when that research was done, was a document created and then filed away for future reference? And that's the sense, I think, that perhaps the committee is looking to better understand what are the resources at your end, if they exist. And if they don't, then perhaps one of the assignments of this committee would be to assist in trying to help gather that kind of information. Thank you.
Janet,
I was just gonna say it would help, I think, to just have the list of what are the areas we want to look at. So class size is one, tuition charges is one. I don't know if out of district placements can be in a normative benchmark kind of thing, but it would help them to know what exists and provide us with information if our list was very specific.
The class size information would be a significant amount of work. Only because if you're looking at class size, you can look at average. I mean, we can look at averages, but I don't personally find that to be particularly meaningful. Like even when I look at ours right now, every school is a bit of a different situation. And so class sizes, it's not like there's a little bit more art to it than, there's a science to it and then there's the art to it.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. When I'm looking at class size, even according to our policy, there's some classes we can't fit, let's say, up to 25 in, right? Because the physical space that those kids are in are smaller. Now you have to know in every school, and this is some of the work I'm doing right now, is I'm taking how we've done class sizes and moved away from like it's a straight 25, because people say, oh, hey, you could fit, let's say 100 more kids in the first grade, but you really can't, it's making an assumption that all classrooms can fit 25 or 22, and they can't. So one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm going through with the principals and we're documenting where class sizes have to be smaller because of physical space, right? So that work hadn't been done here before. So in order to really understand what class size should be in a particular school or classroom, you kind of have to know when your programs, you need to know your physical space, and of course, you need to know how many students are coming and what you anticipate. And here, as I mentioned before, your churn is so significant here. It's really, really challenging. In most schools, I mean, you can see more discernible patterns, and I don't see a discernible pattern yet. Now, I've only been here for shy of 2 years. So of course, you know, how much could I have accumulated for data that I can rely on? And then the deeper I get into it around this clean data challenge is like, I look at the DESE reports, and when I go back and I look at like 23 and 22 and what I can see, right? It says things like, how many teachers do you have in Brookline? It says something like 584. I'm like, no, we don't. We have 1,400 employees. So that tells me then how we're reporting that information, I got to take a deeper look at. And if it's been reported year over year in the same way, but it's not consistent, then when you're comparing Brookline to other school districts, then how meaningful is that? So for me, it comes back to having clean data in the first place. And it's all over the place. So our data comes from a couple of different sources. You have your human resource type information and accounting systems. And then you have your student information systems, and they're not the same. A lot of the work that we do is on student information systems, and it's not as clear cut as like Munis, right? There is one. I mean, in Massachusetts, and that's been true. Most of the other companies that have done business in Massachusetts have left because there's all of these, it's a tricky state to design software for, right? We're Massachusetts, and we have a lot of things that are not common, and exceptions and this and that. So yeah, the gold standard in Massachusetts for cities and towns, not regional schools. No regional schools use Munis. Regional schools do not use Munis because we don't have to, because those other products are designed for school use, not for town use. So Munis is what you have, and you're not going to change that. I'm just trying to figure out how do we get it so that it can be useful to us at this point. But anyways, going back, there's 2 major databases that you have, sometimes 3, but usually 2. Your accounting and human resource systems, and in the school side, your student information systems. The student information system side has the information about class size. It has information about assignments, courses, scheduling, you know, all the student information. That database for Brookline has a lot of cleanup that needs to be done. Your Munis systems have a lot of cleanup that need to be done. And it takes time to do it, right? But you have to start with what is, identify what it should be, and then you have to transition each of them. And I don't know a faster way to do it. I really don't. I agree with you. It's incredibly frustrating when you sit here 10 years and you get to a place where it feels like it's right. What is that? The gopher that thank you, Groundhog Day, the gopher, you know. It feels like that. But I don't know how else to do it, but then just to dig down and keep plugging away, trying to get it taken care of. I mean, you can't change Munis until you know what you want to change, what you need to change on the school side. And I think that's the frustration. And Mary Ellen tried to use GovConnect, what is it? OpenGov, sorry. OpenGov to try to get her baseline.
To build
right?
a crosswalk, essentially.
To build a crosswalk between.
You're missing your crosswalk. I'm sure at some point it existed.
Yeah.
But it's not, you know, it's gone. Even you're talking about an audit of the school spaces. I know that Matt Gillis and Joe Connolly did that probably 5-6 years ago. You know, the very same information existed, but it hasn't been maintained.
And this is the other problem, and I mentioned this before too, is like, where do we store our data? In Google. And then when the person leaves, I mean, a lot of this work it's crazy. I mean, I could go on and on about how nuts some of this stuff is. I mean, certain standard tools that you would see in any other system, I don't even really have access to. I mean, right now, like,
because they're in Google with.
No, because we don't have control over a lot of this on the school side. We don't have control over it. I'll give you an example. DocuSign. I don't own the instance of DocuSign. I don't own the instance of Adobe right? And so school staff members don't, these are common tools. Even on the school side, you don't have Microsoft tools. I'm trying to do a lot of this stuff in Google. It's insane. I'm sorry. It's so, I've been doing this a long time, and the standard tools that I would use any other place, it's like very challenging to even get access to them. I'll give you another example of how I do work over and over and over again. Right now, I am printing personnel action forms out and having to hand sign them because I set them up in Adobe, but there was an update made in Adobe, and now it won't save my signature. Without my signature, the actions can't go on, right? And so I have to physically print out form. I can't even believe I'm doing this in this time, space, and sequence that we live in.
But why are you using workflow Munis? Then you don't have to worry about a signature.
Because there's things in there. There's there we go. There's 100 things, right? A lot of the actions aren't all generated out of HR, right? There's school staff at the building level that need to be able to process actions. They don't know how to do it. They don't have access to the system to do that. So in order to be able to have one way of doing things, not if you're in this situation at the school, you use this form. But if you're doing these kinds of actions, you use the Munis form. It gets very convoluted when you have to have, what if then you use this form? What if then you do this? So we created one in Adobe, so at least everything wouldn't have to be physically done by hand. The problem is not everybody has access to Adobe on the school side. And in order to get an instance for each one of the administrators and secretaries, there's a process that you have to go through to get the town side IT department to actually give you an instance with the professional license so that you can do these things. So it just everything becomes very convoluted. In order, like I would have been able to get this stuff done in a very short period of time if I had IT on my side, but I don't have IT on my side. IT and many of our tools sit on the town side. And so we have to go through these processes, in order to get very simple things like that done.
But how much does an Adobe Pro like that?
I don't know.
That license costs a huge amount of money.
But
That's
if
the
we
other
need
thing.
it to do the work that we're doing, we need it.
There needs to be a collaborative process there. Then you can't just say I don't have access to it and I don't have it. It costs hundreds of dollars for a license, and you're asking for hundreds of licenses. Then we need to figure out a way to pay for them.
Right.
But the solution isn't to give it to everyone to make it easy.
I'm not saying I think there's
know.
a certain suite of tools that all administrators should have access to, and we don't on the school side.
So I think one of the things that's happening, spoken about, and is we're learning a lot about how town departments are set up and how different things are working or not. And I think that to the extent that there are efficiencies, operational efficiencies that are within our grasp, we need to understand kind of like what those requirements are, kind of like force rank them and understand what the cost of obtaining those are and the cost of maintaining them, because there's sometimes an upfront cost, but then there's a subscription cost, and that needs to be understood. And once we understand that cost, we need to be able to sort of quantify the efficiency return on that investment, which is a difficult thing to do, but I'm not sure we'll ever make progress if we kind of don't go through that sort of an exercise.
Jesse?
Yeah, hi. Two comments. One, to Dick's point, I think we should at least proceed in determining what benchmarks are most important and whether or not they're. And then to Susan's point, although I'll go back to another thing Susan said, for each of those, what's our measurement of what their quality is? So if you're going to tell us, if we're going to hear that. Let's just say that MCAS data provided to DESE may be inaccurate. then there's no reason for us to benchmark MCAS data. If we're going to hear that there's no way to get accurate class sizes, and what we have up in DESE is not accurate, then we really can't benchmark any measurement objectives against class size. So I think that it's important, as you know, you're sharing this information with us, to understand for each of these benchmarks what's our a confidence value on them, and we can only really get that from the people that are actually doing the work. So the more open you can be with us about each of these main benchmarks, I think the clearer it'll be to us is how big the challenges are. And the other thing I was going to say is I'm assuming that when Chaz and the group has the other 10 odd other communities where they're looking at maybe alternatives to town school partnerships, outlined for our subcommittee with Sadaf and I, et cetera, is to perhaps see where in those cases there are much better synergies than Brookline in being able to handle the sharing of data, the sharing of responsibilities, the sharing of processes, the sharing of software, et cetera. Because in listening to this conversation, it really seems like there's like two different ecosystems running with very frail connections between them, that on the town side, that on the school side. Sort of amazing that it even sort of gets to all work. And I think that gets to a sort of a core question we need to ask ourselves is if we're an expenditure and revenue study committee, we don't really have clear, at least on the school side, clear vision on a weekly or monthly basis to the expenditures and less side on our side to the revenues, then how can we begin to manage what our challenges are? So I think we really, I think Dick's point put a, sort of an arrow in the center that we really need to spend some time finding those most important benchmarks and then understand what their quality is, how well do we know them, how often do we measure them, do we need to get every classroom teacher, because we know we have somebody in the district who actually does absenteeism and attendance every single day. That means we know every single student in the system, whether they're here or not. We also know what classroom, let's say K-8, that they're in, and therefore we know exactly how many classrooms are being populated. We know how big every single classroom is, and it goes without saying in 2025, we ought to be able to know digitally how many students are in every class, what square footage of the class, how many desks there are, and then tie that into, over time to performance of the students and performance of the system. So I think Dick's points are sort of a great launching platform for us to sort of take some of our future conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I also just want to flag, because I think Susie raised something, and I don't know if you're ready to talk about the timeline for overrides more generally, or the concept there, that we talked about internally. Right? Is that something we want to discuss at this juncture? Or, yeah, Susie.
Yeah, no, sure. One of the things one wondering I have after meeting, the last time and hearing, what the hopes are, is that this group would like to wrap up their work and make recommendations in time for the upcoming, not this town meeting of the fall, but for next fiscal year. And some of the work that needs to be done, as I had mentioned, the last time we were here, isn't work that can be done in the next 5 months completely. When we're looking at how to reimagine schools and look at different configuration of the model, that's not something that can be done in 5 months. And so I just thought it would be important to throw that out there, so that if there's this expectation that somehow on the school side, that a committee of people are going to get together, evaluate all the factors that would enable us to make a decision. That work, my experience, because I've done it before, is not something that can be done in a 5-month period of time. So if that, I just didn't want people to have this idea that somehow, and be disappointed if the schools are knee deep in it, because model changes require community support. And in order to be able to get community support for that, and its community means the learning community, families, staff, administration, school committee, et cetera, all have to kind of be on the same page in order to make those kind of big changes if you're going to make them. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Can we
there.
be very clear what you mean by model change?
K-12.
Yeah.
Does everyone understand?
Yes, yeah.
So moving from a K-8 system to a system that's elementary, middle, and high school.
Yeah, if you were gonna do something like that, it's not a simple matter of like flip the switch, there's a lot of work that has to be done. And so, when we were meeting the other day, I just mentioned to Chaz that, wanted to make sure that we're clear about, how long it takes in order to really be able to do that. And it's not, even if the decision was made, then you have to plan for that and then budget for that and all of, all those things. It would even require changes in units, right? Because then we would have some elementaries with middle, perhaps, or however we arrange it. We'd still have to change our chart of accounts again in order to be, so there's all this work that would have to be done in order to implement that. And there's no way that could even humanly be done between now and implement for July 1 of next year.
That's the expectation, right? Like, unless I'm missing something, even if you were to decide to do sort of a larger scale model change, an override would have to bridge a gap because it would take a long time to actually migrate to that. So these timelines are totally different, right? That wasn't my expectation, right? I don't know if other people had a different expectation. I know that there's some hand raised.
Sergio?
I think that I wanted to ask Dr. Gibbons, since you are now, as I understand it, the sole remaining assistant superintendent on the school side, and you've indicated that you're not necessarily getting the staff support that you may require. I would like to ask you if you could give us your advice concerning what you feel are the priorities for yourself and your team over, let's say, a 5-month period. What are the ducks that you're trying to get in order? What are the things you're trying to focus on? What kind of output are you trying to achieve at this time? Thank you.
The first order of priority for me is to make sure that we're able to open schools in September in a smooth and orderly fashion. And in order to do that, right now, we're knee deep in evaluating class size, collapsing sections, opening sections, so that we can get teachers hired for the next school year. So that's a huge priority, right now. Another one is for me, and I don't know if I can, but I'm so committed and stubborn. I really want to have the next iteration of cleaning done on the accounting system. So I saw a lot this year of challenges around how our chart of accounts is set up, and it's not in alignment with the budget model as it's currently designed. And I'm working to try to get the FY26 budget to comport with the current model as tightly as I can, so that I can give the town some, the best information when we do the upload, which will make a huge difference in our ability to print and prepare reports next year, to be less reliant on having to manipulate data out of Munis. So that's a huge goal of mine right now. One of the challenges is that with the turnover of staff and all these people exiting, there's a lot of information coming to me, and I think Karen is probably feeling a lot of this too, for all the work that gets done in the summer, that, let's say, for example, we do trainings, we do administrative retreats where we have conversations about our educational plans in the future and all of that, and do a lot of that work. There's nobody to plan that. That's been planned by the Deputy of Teaching and Learning, who's leaving in a couple of weeks. And her focus is on trying to get as much in place as possible so that we can implement our literacy program. So a lot of pass-off information is coming my way to keep things rolling while we transition people out and transition people in. So it creates a real challenge. Another challenges that, some of the way that we're set up right now structurally, is not optimal for getting some of the work done. And so, I'm looking at how do we restructure? We've just, not only did we eliminate a good chunk of people out of the town hall offices that were working full-time, but we also now have all this turnover. And so how are we going to get the work done next year? There's nobody to do communication left, right? That was the superintendent and the communication person. Who's going to do the communication piece? We have no data person. And so there's all these demands to get data and evaluate data and produce this, and there's nobody to do it. And so what other people are picking up, the remaining people are picking up, we're asking them to do more than they have the ability and sometimes the skills to do. So those are kind of the challenges. But I'm trying to stay focused myself on getting positions filled, in all as many of the offices as we can. The school committee is pretty, I think, committed to hiring an interim superintendent for on the 16th, which would be great. Doesn't mean they can start though. Just because they're appointed then doesn't mean they can start. We do have some candidates for the interim teaching and learning, and I'm pulling together a small group of people to do preliminary screening. So when that person comes on board, we can give them folks to, before the pool dries up. I mean, that's what happens in our field, is the pool dries up if you don't take action and engage in the various people that are applying. So those are some of the things that are on my mind. If I can't get the accounting stuff cleaned up, then next year's just going to be all the more challenging. The other thing, we continue to work with our staff to advance their skills and acumen for doing some of these operational procedures, like, contracts and POs. And I think we've made a lot of, headway there, but there's still some more work. So we're rolling out some more simplified ways of doing it so that, again, if we can get contracts in place, let's say by, for the year, by July, then that's done and we can move on. So I'm trying to stay focused on those types of things, more on what I can do, and let all the noise that's going on around just be noise, because.
May I ask that in addition to the superintendent or the interim, are the assistant superintendent positions also actively being sought out for replacement?
The deputy of teaching and learning is actively being, we're recruiting for that. And we hope to be able to appoint somebody by the end of this month. So that's the goal. Interim. These are interim positions, right? Interim positions. And then there's no active search for the interim deputy for student services, though our current interim has made a commitment to staying through September. Am I understanding this? Yes. She's nodding yes.
September 2026.
So, and the thing, and I'm grateful that she's willing to do that on behalf of the school department and the town, because at least it gives me a partner for trying to get some of these pieces in place. As she's been fantastic in terms of being able to get some of the infrastructure in place that has caused us such pain over the last several years. In terms of data, we actually have a budget for OSS for all of the accounts. So I'm delighted that we have that. So in other words, if we have, there's nothing to manage if nobody gives you any detail, right? If you just have a number and you don't know what the composition of that number is, then it's hard to know whether you're up or down. So to be able to enter this year with an actual concrete budget in place for every one of our cost centers is huge. And I have to say that one of the things that has gotten lost in all of this, because it's never satisfying to anybody when you can't have a big fat check, right? Significant progress has been made, and we're not where we want to be, any of us, but it doesn't mean that giant steps forward haven't been achieved, and that sets you in a place where you can grow from. you know, each one of these foundational pieces as they're there, if we're allowed to lay it, you know, well, will situate you for the future so that like when I leave or when Karen leaves, there's something to hand off. You know, that's, I can't stress how hugely beneficial that will be for those that will come after myself and after Karen and after whoever else is hired after Melissa leaves, you know, or retire, whatever, you know, if there's nothing for people to pass off to somebody, then we're always planning.
Melissa gets changed at her desk.
Yeah, before you go,
Yeah.
okay, so you've laid out a lot of problems that you have to solve internally. At the same time, you told us that you're looking at change in terms of the model from the school.
Oh.
From the standpoint of this committee, you've created an impossible situation. I mean, not you, but that's an impossible situation in
It
that
is.
everything that you're talking about fixing is thrown out the window if you're talking about changing the model over a relatively short period of time.
No, I don't see it that way, actually. I think you can't make the change until you get a foundation from which to change from.
Yeah.
And I don't think I don't think there's that the effort's wasted. What is impossible is that with all the churn in staff, trying to stay focused on building some of that foundation in the time, space, and sequence that you have to do it.
So I'm concerned about this committee and our.
Oh, your work, yeah.
But I mean, that's, you know, sorry.
Yeah.
And I think Susan
Yeah.
raises a really important point with that, which is we also, what I've heard is that we don't want to be in the same place we are now, which is we're in year 3 of an override. And yet there were significant cuts that need to be made to the school department's budget from where they wanted to be versus where they wound up. And we don't want to be there again. It's the aim of the community is to try and avoid that outcome. And there are many reasons for why we wound up there, you know, including things that we had no control over and things that we did. We talked about those drivers and costs that wound up that put us where we were versus where we thought we were going to be in 2022, 2023, when we put that override on the ballot. So I think the question to this committee is, knowing that the schools have, you know, Susan frankly has this mountain of work in front of her to get the information necessary to even have a grasp on where the department is this fiscal year and next fiscal year. What do you want to try and be projecting out from there, any potential budget discussion, or do you want to figure out something else?
Cliff and Dick and then Sergio.
So that was sort of gonna be the first question, which is that I don't understand how given where the school department is with respect to its leadership, that they're going to be able to put together any sort of a 3-year projection and any sort of confidence. And I think that really does have an impact, obviously, on what this committee should be looking at and actually can end up saying to people. I think that's it's pretty fundamental. And I also would just agree with Susan that, you know, even if people wanted to switch the model, it's going to take a long time to actually evaluate it. I'd be surprised if
But the process of even looking at it is going to create a lot of chaos that kind of affects what we can do. And
Well, I think the process of looking at it would, and coming to a conclusion would exceed the amount of time that we would normally look at doing an override for. So I do think that if the school committee wanted to evaluate it, they could do it, you know, on parallel paths without necessarily impacting what an override, to the extent we needed one, would need to be, how it would need to be structured for 2 or 3 years. But
Dick,
You've gone exactly where I was going to go, and that is, my question was, what are the expense and revenue projections for fiscal year 27, 28, and 29? And what assumptions would be used? Can you do something, basically assuming the status quo. And, or is that impossible, or is it just a guess? Insofar as we're supposed to be looking at an override.
I mean, if I'm gonna give you my best, without looking at any numbers, I'm just looking at how numbers landed this year. We have a structural deficit that wasn't close this year. So we have a $2 million structural deficit that still has to be attended to. I think it's challenging. To answer your question, I think it's going to be very challenging because structural, but I can give you the pieces that I know. Structural deficit's about that, right? $2 million. In addition to that, you can count on.
There's a message up there.
What?
Sorry, Dan.
Okay. The second thing I can say is that your breathing costs of your contracts, it's fair to assume that they'd be similar next year to this year, even without me getting who's going to move, columns and stuff. Let's say that's $6 million. Right there, we're at 8. That's without a dime of an increase in any other costs on the school side. So every contract that we have, the bus transportation, all of that, and that's not even OSS costs. Those are just standard regular costs. If the OSS budget goes up, and who knows what it's going to go up by, some will go up just simply because cost of living, restructuring of programs. And so I don't know what to project on that. And Karen's only been here, for a few months now, and I don't know how she would at this point be able to make any kind of projection right now. And I don't know that she will before she completes her time with us in September. So I don't know how to answer that, but what I can say, and I feel good about, is at least I have a good place to launch from. At least I've got the baseline, and I didn't have that. So, at least we'll be able to track some from there. And I know she's putting systems in place there so that we'll have the ability to project, and she's doing a tremendous amount of work with her staff to make sure she institutionalizes to the extent that she can the processes and procedures that are in place so that we can keep an eye on it. So those are our big buckets in schools are always staffing, utilities, which we don't pay for. That's on the town side. I don't know what that is. Benefits, which sits on the town side. And then our buses and materials are the least amount. Right now, there's nothing left to cut. Let me just be clear. There's nothing left to cut on the school side except programming.
Right.
And so that's why I'm saying any reduction in expenses is going to have to be something that the community will allow. Right. And we can see even when we put budget reductions on the table, sometimes there's such conviction on part of members of the community that they can't do without that particular thing, that the recommendation of the administration is then is not supported.
Okay, Sergio, and then after that, but it is 5:15. We're over the time allotted.
I'll be brief. I wanted to circle back to comments from both Jesse and Dick and Cliff, as well as yourself, Dr. Gibbons. I was encouraged to hear you say that some of the things you are trying to do now is to look at these questions of whether there are possibilities for class consolidation and so forth. And that brings me back to the somewhat infamous enrollment chart that was published on the 3rd of March from the superintendent's office, which I think many people have pointed to as both an important document, but the one that we have appears to have many errors. Wrong number of sections assigned to Baker and to Driscoll, lack of clarity about where the classrooms for BEEP, for example, that some of which are in the schools. So I am hopeful that while not ready for today, that would be something that you would be trying to advance in order to give you the kind of clean data, to use your terminology, to make plans for this year and next. Thank you.
to that?
Yeah, I had sort of a similar comment to Sergio. Thank you for making your comment, Sergio. I think, I realize the schools are in a difficult position. There's obviously a lot of turnover in the central office, but given what we've seen of the budget, I don't think it's an option for us to not be in a position to consider what an override might look like. So the question I'd ask a different question, which is, Sergio, I think what you were getting at, which is, what is the information you need to get you your best understanding of what the revenues and expenses would be, so that we can put together a point of view. Otherwise, you're inevitably, I think, going to have a deficit. And so I think I would reframe it as, what do you need in order to be in a position by X date? We should talk about what that date is, to get there. Because I don't think the answer is, hey, well, we just don't know, so we're not going to be able to have a point of view on this. Although I want to acknowledge, obviously, it makes it more difficult for this group to do what we've been mandated to do. And Dr. Gibbons, that's a question for you.
Well, for me,
Yes.
I thought you were asking.
No, that was a question for you. I think that So- we will need to come up with a budget for the 3 years, fiscal 27, 28, 29. And there's a lot that's going on. Obviously, there are a lot of things that need to be remedied within school. There's a lot of churn. You said you don't know how you'll get there. I think we have to think about how do you get there given the current state by the date that we agree on, so that we can have an input into what we need in order to determine whether an override is required. And most likely it will be required. Otherwise, you have significant cuts from a program standpoint, which again, it isn't going to be viable, or is going to be palatable to the community.
Or more importantly, if I might add, that the community is never presented with choices. A choice would be cut a program, but another choice might be to say to the community, would you accept another child in your child's classroom? That's the choice. And I've never heard the question asked that way.
And I would also add, for example, it appears that unless I'm misreading their new contract, Newton has now negotiated that new hires have a 52% contribution toward their health insurance. Existing employees are at their prior level, but there is a different lower level for new employees. I mean, there are levers that can be pulled. They'd have to be negotiated with the unions. The alternatives, might be either an override, job cuts, staff reductions, but it's not a static situation.
I'd also point out, though, that earlier this year, and Susan, alluded to this, that the staff came up with modifications to some programs and suggestions for reductions that the school committee that was in place this past year rejected. And so that led to a different situation that had to be addressed than one that would have existed if the school committee had gone along with the administration's recommendations. And I'm not sure that I believe that given the state of the administration, meaning the lack of senior personnel, that we would get reasonable information and projections on the expense side until you have a superintendent that's in place that is able to project out what their particular vision is. And if we don't have that, then to put on in front of the voters a 3-year program to balance a budget that a new superintendent really hasn't had the chance to evaluate and influence, I think is a huge mistake.
I mean, that
I
happened.
I think the alternative, though, is to then, you have an interim superintendent for the course of this academic year. Then you put a permanent superintendent in place. They have to ramp up, and that's, 18 months. I mean, I just want to make sure that from a timeline perspective, that's sort of realistically when you would have effective visibility within the paradigm that you mentioned. I acknowledge the complexities. I just think the question is, okay, well, then you have sort of 2 budget years that pass by in the meantime, and what happens then? Because when you cut some of these programs, or you cut staff, then regaining that's also really hard, right?
Janet?
Melissa was gonna, you made a point.
No, I was just saying that that's exactly what happened when Bill Lapidi left. The override passed. There was an org study done that no one has anymore, and no one knew how to implement. And, the people that were selling the plan were gone.
Janet?
So it seems to me, given where we are, the best that we're gonna get is steady state. And going forward, as more people are brought in, they need to understand that, because I don't think we can do nothing until that new administration, new thing is in place. Basically, because Susan just said we have how much of a what am I going to do in the meantime problem. So for me, the most important thing is fixing the model she works with now, so that you're starting to get reliable data from which you can make projections and make changes. So my question gets to, within the time that we're supposed to be working, what do you need to accomplish? Whether it's all kinds of people sitting doing data entry, whether someone can write this super duper, I'm gonna look at you, program that transitions everything that's a problem for you into Munis with a snap of a finger.
I'm working on it right now.
And the money you'd need to do the program. But for me, it's that basic understanding, because I've been where Susan is on a much smaller level. But I don't think we're going to sit here, even if we sit through June and come up with, this is the money we're going to need reliably for the next 3 years with all these changes, because a lot of what we would suggest is going to require a ton of negotiation, particularly with staff, with the GIC, which brings in all the staff. And that goes on its own cycle, which I no longer remember. So Melissa, please remind me. But I'm hearing a lot of things that I heard as I exited. I exited just ahead of Mary Ellen, and I'm crushed that she didn't get it finished. I will make to you the same thing that I proposed to Mary. If I can be of any help in any way, pick my brain, use my fingers, I'll do data entry. But the schools need to know where they are. And it seems like you've got all these obstacles for getting you there. I'd love to see, here are all the places I hit a roadblock, so then people can start discussing, figuring out ways to make them go away. And it's not just you, because I think you have a couple of things on your plate right now.
Okay, well, how do we pull this together? I'm sorry, Dick.
It's
Right.
right.
Oh, you just laugh. That sounded like a profound statement.
Were you emotionally?
That's the chair's job to pull it over.
No, but I'm soliciting information, or soliciting ideas.
I think I think, so. I think you, the committee, need to make a foundational decision about how you want to proceed in terms of time horizon, right? What you're hearing is, and I don't think we've heard discussed here either, is collective bargaining, right? All the school contracts are about to be up and they're about to renegotiate. And that's a process that could take a long time too, potentially. And it adds an additional layer of uncertainty to all of this. In my kind of dream world, what I had hoped would happen over this summer would be all of us would get in the room together and hammer something out, and we could have a proposal to put on the ballot, if we needed to put it on the ballot in May of next year, that says, here are the contracts, here's everything we've settled, here are the actual costs. Because one of the things that we heard, community feedback was, well, why didn't you put money in the last override for collective bargaining? You can't put money in an override for collective bargaining for an agreement you haven't agreed to yet, because then all the unions lose, because that's my money. And you have a tragedy of the commons problem. So that my ideal vision was to do that, and then to have those hard conversations with our bargaining units and say, look, We gotta move off the healthcare number. We gotta move off 8317. We gotta talk about standardizing payroll. We gotta do all these things that are money savers that require unanimous union or near unanimous union buy-in to do. And we gotta do it in order to bring costs down and make it possible to execute any new collective bargaining agreement with you at all. And after that, we put it all in front of the community and say, okay, this is the actual cost it will cost you to run this community for the next 3 years. What I'm hearing as part of this conversation is we're not going to have the data available to us to do that. We're not going to be able, it's just not possible for us to be able to get everyone in that room together and say, all right, we can, this is X, this is Y, and we can make this happen. So the question is, to Sadaf's point, do you want to try and project out with what you have and run the risk that it's not going to be enough, or that it's, I don't know, too much in some way? I don't know if that's possible. Do you want to wait? Do you want to extend the horizon? Do you want to potentially say until the schools get their feet under them? But then remember, what you're looking at is that $8 million right off the bat. And we're going to be going through a similar, more difficult exercise next year with the school budget in terms of cuts. And I think can't remember whose point it was, but once you got cut things, it's hard to restore them. Or do you want to try and find some placeholder or some other place? You want to potentially investigate the 1-year override on the ballot? Do you want to investigate trying to get to try some combination of those, trying to pull other levers, and then if that's not available to us, putting something temporary on the ballot and then coming back to this conversation? I don't know. That I think is the question for this committee.
So I guess I would start by understanding what's the drop dead date by which this committee has to go through and finish its process, which I assume would involve some sort of public hearing. I've never personally thought that the end of the summer was going to be something we're ever going to meet. So I work backwards from when it is that the select board would have to make its decision. And then once we know that, then I think it will give us a better understanding of how much breathing room we have, because we really have nothing on the table. We don't have anything on the revenue side. We haven't discussed what levers might be able to be pulled, pull an $8 million deficit. That's without looking at what the allocated revenue increase for next year was going to be. Whatever. If we're in a situation, and hopefully there'll be a new superintendent by then, sometime in the fall. If we're in a situation where working with that new superintendent, you were able to produce, forecasts, projections for a few years, and everyone was comfortable with them, then we can maybe, think about it then. Otherwise, the idea of a 1-year stopgap and having to come back, to me, that's more of a political problem than a financial one. And that's something we certainly could evaluate. I think we need to be flexible.
I believe the drop dead date to put something on the ballot is early March. And you got to remember that's the select board's prerogative. The select board will require at least 2 weeks. The select board's going to probably hold a public hearing, go through that process, and synthesize the data that you present to them. So solve backward from that, you're probably looking into January, start of February, as your absolute drop dead date.
So that,
And that's when you're already starting to look at the following year's budget. Correct.
At that point, it will be in the, but right.
Yeah.
My target for this, I wanted us to build a schedule that was aggressive with the knowledge that it could slip, in the hopes that we could get to something in advance of
To align with
the forecast.
Yeah.
Right. The last select board meeting of the year is the forecast. And that's really the starting gun for the public facing side of the budget.
So that's the end of December?
End of December.
so that,
Thanks. So I just want to call out that I think that realistically, from a superintendent standpoint, I don't know that we'll have an interim for this year, right? We're not going to have a permanent superintendent probably until next summer, I think. And I don't know, Dr. Gibbons, maybe you have a better understanding of this, but that's when the hiring cycle happens, right? For for school staff. So I just want to caution us to just make sure we understand sort of what that cycle looks like. The person we have this year will be an interim. Maybe they'll become the permanent, but that's unlikely. Also, there was a comment about superintendents more broadly. There's sort of a Massachusetts statewide trend that tenure of superintendents tends to not be quite as long as it used to be once upon a time. So I just want to flag that as well. I think having somebody who's here for 20 years like we did in the 80s and 90s, I think is probably not going to happen. I agree with the comment around, you know, can we get to some projections? It might be good for us to get to the forecast, Dr. Givens, and then talk about the confidence level you have in those and use that as an input into whether it warrants a 1 year, you know, or not. And then I think that's a question of, you know, would that pass? How would that be perceived by voters? You know, I'm not sure. I don't have a good pulse on that, but I think we need to get to some budget and then talk about what the confidence level is given all the different variables, Chaz, that you mentioned as well. But I don't think we can do any of this until we get some crack at a budget that we think is, you know, high confidence or low confidence or medium, realistically.
Yeah,
I
I
then
think,
talk and debate.
I agree, and I'll just piggyback on what Melissa said. The timing of it, so one of the things that I'm very interested in seeing how it plays out is all that's going on at the federal level around visas and everything else. That could have a real significant impact on our enrollment. And so I won't know that though. I won't know that until we get to our October 1 report to see how that plays out.
In October also, in addition to enrollment, that's like when we have what we think is a good cut of the group health numbers too.
Right. So October, I always say the best, there's 2 times a year that I can give the best financial information on the school side. And that is like the end of October, really. A lot of my expenses are fairly solid by then. And then it's usually like May 1st, right? Those are the 2 times that you have the most clarity. And so I feel pretty comfortable though, that if following those timelines that I can give you a much stronger projection this year, but I would really want to see what's going to happen with enrollment. The churn is just so crazy. And of course, our costs are driven by programs, which are driven by students. And knowing what that student profile is going to be will be enormously helpful. I can say, I look at it, I mean, we just collapsed 3 sections. We added 3 sections. I had to add another teacher in another area. So I do monitor this so that we're not always adding, you know, if the numbers don't warrant it, we collapse a section. And so I'll manage accordingly this year. But I don't know what's going to happen. In collapsing sections after the school year begins is not something that will happen, right? You can't start collapsing sections after we open, but then it gives me the data with which to do the projection for the next year. So I think in the fall, not only that, I mean, I won't have any, I don't suspect I'll have any information about contract settlements, but we can certainly do some projecting from there. We know breathing costs of all the contracts right now is about 6 million. You can expect that to go up a couple $100,000 each year. So I think there's some forecasting we can do. December, I should be able to give Melissa some stronger information than I could this year. So
November.
November even, actually. And this is all, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. And so I say in a vacuum, you know, I can get all this work done as if I'm going to be able to do my own job, right? And one of the challenges is that I oftentimes spend my time not doing my job and having to do all these other jobs because that work needs to be done in order to keep things kind of rolling along. So, but I feel pretty comfortable in being able to get that information. That I can't do it out of sequence this year. I just don't have any capacity.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts on the timing, and certainly this is up to the select board, but it feels a little tricky to me that we would be able to pass 2 overrides if we were to pass a 1 year, let's say, then come back right back to the voters and try to pass something else. You know, it takes a lot of time and effort to do these committees. We've all been on them, and presumably we'd want to do another one if we were going to try to come back to the voters in, you know, 2027. I also feel like that right now we all kind of know the data is is what it is, right? We're gonna have interim supers, we're gonna have maybe permanent, there's gonna be spin up time, other deputies, will hopefully come in. It just seems to me like while I absolutely understand the impossibility of having great data, we never have perfect data. So it seems to me that while maybe when we were thinking we'd have some 75 or 80% confidence in what we have, maybe we have 60, but I don't want to discount thinking about putting a longer term override on the ballot next year, because I just, it's like we're never gonna have that perfect data, and having multiple overrides. I'm not even sure we could pass one override next year, because a lot of people have been talking about how expensive things have gotten. So, trying to pass two just almost seems impossible to me. But again, that's up to the select board to decide to put it on the ballot anyway.
And even one is gonna be bigger than one because we have other town departments.
Right, for sure. So just something to think about.
I would add, conversely, a 3-year override is gonna look a lot more daunting.
For sure.
In terms of number, just single family
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
in Brookline have gone up about 90% over the last 10 years. The average single family tax bill.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's,
And I'd also just point out in terms of projections, confidence levels, the last projections for the 3-year override that we're in. If we did not have the issues that we had in special education, really, that to a certain extent were out of our control, obviously. Some of the issues in the OSS that, exacerbated things. The numbers were pretty darn close if you took those out. And I think that had to do with the work that was done and being able to have confidence in what you were projecting out. I actually was pretty surprised. It was as close as it turned out to be. So I understand your concern. But I also think that's first of all, I'm not suggesting that we're going to end up there anyway.
yeah.
But if we did, and if we felt it was, again, it becomes a political question as to whether or not people would be willing to do it. It's going to look a lot more palatable than a 3-year number that you're going to have to put a buffer in because you're really not sure.
Sure.
I think the biggest factor really goes in 2 directions, like it's the OSS piece. Like, what is the real trend there? Because if we never had the baseline in the first place, then it's hard to be able to say we're increasing at X number of percentage until you close the year and you look back historically, right? But the profile of the student and the student needs may change looking forward and may not replicate what's looking behind you on the OSS side. That's the hardest one always to be able to project, but it's not impossible. I've had some pretty good success if I have good baseline data on that. And then the other piece is this enrollment part. I'm not worried about giving you a salary projection. I just did, right? I mean, I feel pretty good about that's about what the trend is, and then you add your cost of living and you can run with that. I feel pretty good about that. The structural deficit is what it is. I feel that's a strong number, right? So we've got 8 million there. I would say if we're going to put a holder in right now, I would say maybe $10 million on the school side, if you're including every other cost. I'm not saying that's the strong number, but if I was just hedging, a number that you should run with for the moment, I would say that, and then we can work to more solid numbers once I get this OSS piece and I see with enrollment that could dial back.
That's without any revenue increase.
or
Say on the expense side.
Yeah.
or cost reductions.
Right.
So that's right.
10 million.
Right, if the structural deficit is covered by programmatic reductions, and I think that's where everybody's talking about the challenges without having an administration intact. And it comes back to what will the community tolerate in terms of programmatic cuts? It really comes down to that.
Is it 10 million over 3 years?
No.
10 million a
No.
year.
Next
for
year's
1 year.
increase.
Yeah.
This year's increase was 13.1 million. I'm saying next year. You know, if we're I'm just sitting here now. I'm not-
I see how it adds up, but I mean,
You know, I mean, if I just add up pieces and parts, I'm saying, I think, and I've said that before, I think I would start with a $10 million number. For the school department next year.
Well, okay, wrap this up. I'll work with Chaz and others to make sure that our schedule of events for this committee is modified to take into account our discussion today. And we'll go forward. Yes, John.
And I have a request for the next meeting to have an item on the agenda to really talk about our methodology. I'm kind of feeling at sea, frankly. I just on the long range planning forecast here, which Melissa knows all too well. And I would like us to at least use that as some kind of guide as to in it forecast $10 million. So that the schools, that's probably a bit of overlap there, but probably that's 40, we're up to 14 or 15 before we started counting, I think. But our charge number one is to really determine if there is a structural gap. So I think that going there and looking at the hotspots, obviously the schools is a major contribution. No question about that. But having a look at that, I'm worried about this discussion of schools that we haven't really come up with any either efficiencies or revenue possibilities. And yet here we are at the end of that time. We're moving on to the town side, I think, in our next meeting. So I would like to kind of get some feeling of how we're going to get to whatever the goal is. And I think the summer is way too early, frankly. But nonetheless, how are we going to get there? Because I just don't see it at the moment. I can't see what I'm reporting. Certainly, that we come this far.
Okay, with that instruction. So I will in the
Request.
We've ended the meeting, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.